Your next competitor is probably someone that you haven't met yet.
One of the points he made was that wellness is mainstreaming now, and we don't even know what this category is actually. Is it preventative health? Is it whatever?
Barnes & Noble didn't see Amazon coming, or the taxi industry and limo industry didn't see Uber coming, the hotel industry didn't see Airbnb coming, and these were all companies that were started, to this point, by people that weren't even from the industry.
Politics is hard. I think it's an almost impossible Olympic sport.
Americans today, we are sicker than we've ever been. Our healthcare systems and drug companies are richer, and there's a significant misalignment between high spending and actual health improvement.
Welcome to this week's episode of Lifts. Just returned back from the Athletech event in New York. Mo, how are you doing this week?
I'm doing good. I'm energized. I'm charged up. Well, we are coming back from the very first Athletech Innovation Summit in New York. I traveled a lot less further than you, taking the train up from DC, which is always a treat. But so much to talk about from that conference.
We got a guest with us today, Mo. Are you going to do the honors? Not the first time.
I would love to. I mean, there's so much ground to cover, and to help us break it all down, we're joined by someone who really needs no introduction, but I'm going to give one anyways. She's been a guest on this podcast. I feel like everyone knows her, and that is Emma Berry. Emma Berry is an early member from Les Mills International. She was the former director of group fitness for Equinox. Now she's one of the most sought after global fitness futurists and advisors in the industry. She's worked with dozens of cutting edge brands at the intersection of fitness, technology, and experience, and really brings this rare combination of strategic insight, a global perspective, which I love, and I'll say unapologetic candor. So I'm excited to have her. And Emma, welcome back to Lifts.
Thanks, boys. It's so great to be asked on. It was so great to actually go to an event and attend it with you, where we're not all working in the back rooms doing podcasting and stuff, and to actually take it in. So thanks for having me. Look forward to sharing this with your viewers.
Normally, Mo and I share some health hacks or ideas that we've been working on, and I thought that'd be a good place to start this week. I in particular, as you said, Emma, we normally we're stuck in a back room interviewing and don't really get out to try anything. But this time I did. And I managed to get hooked up to something called True Niagen IV, which is something they called NAD plus. And I was trying throughout the whole day to get a session, and it was totally booked out. And when the Gary Brecker session was on, everybody obviously went in there to see Gary. And the lady said, "Oh, do you want to do it now?" So I said, "Yeah, but I want to watch Gary Brecker." And she said, "Well, I can. If you put one of the chairs at the back of the room, then I'll come out. I'll hook you up, and you can actually do the IV whilst watching Gary Brecker." So I was there at the back of the room. That was kind of like my unique Gary Brecker moment, as I was getting infused with IV. And I must admit, I tried NAD a number of times and never really felt a huge amount of difference. And with this experience, I did kind of feel a little bit tight around the chest as I was having it, which apparently is quite normal. And but I didn't. It wasn't as though when I finished it, I felt superhuman or anything. So I'm not quite sure whether it's something that just happens inside you, and you're just a little bit better and more together, or whether you're meant to feel some kind of boost. So, but the price of these, I think they're a couple of $100 or even more to have it on a regular basis. So I'm just not sure whether the benefits of doing it for me would be enough for me to do it on a regular basis. But I don't know whether you guys had any experiences similar to that.
I didn't do that one, and I was a little bit like you. There was always a queue, and I only had small windows because I really prioritized really learning this one, trying to be in as many sessions as I could across the 2 rooms in the 2 days. But I did actually try. So first of all, Escape, the robotic massage. I mean, that definitely needs a shout out just because they've got such massive clients, in Equinox, Lifetime, and Four Seasons. So again, I was last on the list and they started breaking down the conference, so I missed that one. But one I did try was the ShiftWave, which was you're in a seat and basically you've got, they look like electrodes underneath you, and you're in this vibrational resonance, and it sort of vibrates really quickly, like you're in a high energy earthquake. And then you go through this series and it's going going sort of up and down your body, and then it just stops. And the feeling, I haven't had such a tangible feeling from a product in this space in quite some time. So it can do two things. It can get you ready in terms of readiness, like, let's go, or it can give this incredible sense of calm. And it was almost like that feeling of free falling when you're on the roller coaster. And I'm backed onto Disneyland right now, but you come up and you fall. And I was just like the contrast around that. So I'm beginning to see, I looked at the Innovation Lounge this time round, and I thought there was some true innovation, things that were really pushing forward. So that was my experience. I know Mo went and did other ship. I've also done that on a previous, and probably deserves a shout out as well, Mo.
Yeah, and absolutely. I just want to kind of circle back on the NAD. I'm not sure if a lot of people know what NAD is. So I just want to do a quick explanation of that. I did not have a chance to try it out, but really what NAD is, and I'm going to butcher this, but it's nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide is what
Oh,
it
well,
stands
that's
for. But
impressive, Mo. That is.
it's essentially a coenzyme that is found in every cell of your body, and it really plays a critical role in energy metabolism, cellular repair and longevity, and mitochondrial function. And some of it, people have compared it or thought of it like a supercharged creatine, just because it really taps into the ATP function. And those of us that have taken creatine for many years understands that that's the big one of the big benefits of taking creatine. However, what this does really is it as you age, your body's natural NAD levels decline, as do other things, right? Your hormones, testosterone, and so on. So as you see the natural decline happen, you see increase in things like fatigue, reduced cognitive performance. That's one of the things I'm excited about. Slower recovery, and even anti-aging related diseases. So NAD, its most popular format is what was showcased at the event, which is through IV infusions. There are also supplements that you could take, but there's other things too, Matt. And this is what I've been trying, and you've been doing as well. You could do lifestyle interventions to improve your NAD. Things like fasting, which I know you just talked about at the event, exercise, and improving your sleep. So the reason I didn't try to get this is to your point. I'm a little bit unclear of the benefits. It was like a 45-minute commitment. And I guess if I could listen to a great session while taking it, I probably could have done it. But no, I know a lot of people speak highly about it. And it's one of those supplements that a lot of biohackers really swear by and have really take it on a frequent basis. But it is expensive, but it's part of like one of those longevity protocols that a lot of influencers and biohackers take. For me, one thing that I was really excited about to see at the event was Ammortal. So yes, ShiftWave too. I agree with you, Emma, 100%. I'm a big fan of kind of what they're doing, and the early data is really promising. But Ammortal just kind of came across to me because someone who we all know, in Curtis, went over there a few months ago, and that's how it first came onto my radar. I looked at it on the website. I'm like, it seems like a little bit gimmicky, right? With all the things that it does, the vibration, the red light therapy, and all of that. But what they did at the event, which I thought was really interesting, was they brought a trailer, they put the machine, which is a big machine, it's about $160,000. It's an expensive machine, and they put it in the trailer and they allowed you to book an experience. It was, like the NAD was completely booked up for it. So I'm going to try a session next week here in Virginia at a partner venue that they have here. But I'll tell you that everyone that I know who went through the Ammortal experience came out saying that this is next level. This is an incredible thing. They feel energized. I mean, I had someone who I know say he came out with tears in his eyes because it took him to a place that he didn't go to. So there's just a ton of excitement around it. So I think great move about, from what they didn't have in the trailer there, and opening up the sessions is one of the things I think you've got to kind of try to really experience it. But I'm excited to try it. And that's one of the things coming out of the event that I thought was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I got to jump on that one. And apparently the parts to Ammortal are you've got these what they call vibroacoustics. You've got PEMF, you have these hydrogen, like a hydrogen that goes into your nose, and then you've got this light therapy. And I did the session, and it was in one of these airstreams. It was literally out on the street on, I think it was on Fifth Avenue or somewhere. And so obviously you've got the sirens and everything going along in the background, and coming straight out of the event at 100 miles an hour and then going into this room took some time to bring myself down. But I have to agree, and I'd recommend anyone sort of looking into this, like just the experience. I've done red light, and I've done a lot of these meditation devices and stuff, but this is actually a really sort of 360 experience where you do have the light, you have the audio side, and then you have this vibration that seems to go with the lighting, and it just takes you to an interesting place. I think if I'd done an extra 20 or 30 minutes, or maybe wound myself down before going in there, I would have probably sort of lost myself, like I heard a few other people did as well. So yeah, very, very interesting concept, and I'm sure we'll be hearing a lot more about them.
Well, let's kick it off with the keynote. I mean, I believe all of us was there at the keynote session, was moderated by Athletech's founder, and I guess the MC for the event. Right, the event really didn't have an MC MLS role. You've done many times, and we had Ed. So one, Ed kicked off the event with, I would say, a mini keynote, which I thought really set the stage before he had the opening panel of Anthony Geisler and Callie Means. But Matthew, would love to get your perspective on Ed's opening statement.
It was, I think he did a great job. He introduced the event. He did a number of the panels, and Ed is an entertaining character himself. So I think he did a great job at pulling it all together. A couple of the things that I took away really from Ed's talk, which I made a couple of notes here, is he really played into the partnerships and the importance of businesses within the room and within the sector, figuring out how to work together. One of his statements he says was, rising tides lifts all ships, and I think just the general feel within the room and some of the conversations really sort of play to that, which again isn't normally typical. A lot of the events, in some ways everybody's competitors in a room, where I think he certainly did a good job at sort of, figuring out how we could all work together. I know obviously this wasn't his statement, but Anthony also built onto that conversation, more or less sort of saying, look, there's enough here for everybody, and we need to be sort of looking back at ourselves to say, to almost say, how can we grow this together, as opposed to how to compete with each other, which is quite interesting. And then the other sort of final point was his reference to, your next competitor is probably someone that you haven't met yet. And I think if you listen to some of the conversations, both in the room and out of the room, there's a huge amount of people that are looking to get into this space that we've all been involved in for many, many years. Whether that's from a brand partnership perspective, a product perspective, and I certainly resonated with that to almost sort of say, like, probably every year that we come to this event, there's going to be people that we don't yet know that are going to have a significant influence on on the shape of how this industry evolves. Emma, what are your thoughts on that opening statement?
Yeah, just building on that. Look, first, hats off to Eddie, Leah, and the team. I mean, what an event. I mean, I gave it a solid 9.5 out of 10, only because I'm a little bit Dutch like that. I'm not going to give a 10. There's always room for improvement, but what an event, 2 days, 2 rooms, a bunch of lounges. And I took the same outtakes, and, he had representation from the White House to Wall Street in there. So I think that we were definitely punching up into new conversations, bigger conversations, necessary conversations. So that really stuck with me. I loved the competitor. Your competitor's not sitting across the aisle. They're out there. They're big retail. They're big tech. They're in stealth mode right now. They've got a name you've never heard of, and they're going to come from nowhere. So what do we do to sort of, collaborate and communicate and come together around that? So I really took that. I loved that he that they're obviously inviting a much broader. I love that one of the points he made was that wellness is mainstreaming now, and we don't even know what this category is actually. Is it preventative health? Is it whatever? And there's a whole lot of political things which we'll get into shortly around how we're seen, what is our semantic, etc. But sort of just double clicking on a lot of your key things. But an amazing opening. You could see. He had all the people that we hear the headlines about. Most of them were in the room, and actually it was from the horse's mouth. And I think that was one of the most powerful things of this event. So great welcoming address, framed it beautifully, and then delivered on it.
Mo, what are your what did you take away from that session?
Well, some of the analogies that he made, I'm looking back at my notes here as well. I think it really struck a chord, and these are all things you don't think about. I mean, just going back to your point that your competitors aren't in your room, but he then like spelled it out, talking about um, Barnes and Nobles didn't see Amazon coming, or the taxi industry and limo industry didn't see Uber coming, the hotel industry didn't see Airbnb coming, and these were all companies that were started to this point by people that weren't even from the industry, just had a great idea and really leveraged innovation and technology to really exploit a product category. So that's important. If we don't want to be the next Barnes and Noble, your cab company, or the hotel industry. By the way, I think all three of those have now made a comeback in some ways, in kind of double clicking on their own experiences. But we really have to be open to new ideas. And I think as an industry, it's important for us to say fitness in and of itself, the fundamentals of it, the idea about like movement and eating clean and healthy, getting a hydration and sleep, those will have been here for a millennia and that will never change. But how you go about that and the accessibility of it, I do believe is going to be transformed. And you're seeing minor shifts happen. And to your point, Emma, he had, I think the most diverse group of thinkers and leaders that we typically don't see at an event. I'm really glad to see that. And I love his point on putting our competitive kind of strategies of feelings aside and really be in for the bigger good, because no matter what market you look at, and the US has the highest penetration, it's still only 23%. And that, because some are as low as 20% of penetration in the population. So it's the other 75, 80% that's out there. And instead of us fighting for that same consumer, let's go and figure out a way to get that new consumer in.
There was the one with Anthony and Callie Means, because I know there was it was, I guess it got a little bit political, as from certainly some of the conversations I had around the dinner table afterwards. But I think from my perspective, it was a really interesting message. Like, as an outsider, I'm not really dialed into a lot of the politics that happen over here, but I certainly felt that the key message I got was how do we move from sick care to healthcare. There was definitely a drive that fitness must step into the front role of healthcare, and again, the other takeaway was that we're incentivized as a society to treat sickness and not to prevent it. So I think if you, from where I stood and the feedback that I heard from sort of different sides of the table, I guess if that's what you call it, I think there is a central message that we all should and seem to agree on, which is just the benefits of our industry and how we can have much more of a voice and a role in solving the crisis that governments around the world are all dealing with, which is just this increasing amount of people that are getting sick because of their lifestyle.
I'd love to hear about the dinner and the conversation, because I was actually at dinner that same night with Anthony and Callie. So at the table with them. But why don't we start with your dinner conversation without naming any names, just to set perspective, right? So yeah, I'd love to hear about like what was the conversation at that dinner table like?
It kind of come up on both evenings, and I think there was a feeling that that session got quite political, and however, and I think everybody seemed to be.
How was it political? That's what I'm trying to understand. How was it political?
Well, again, from my perspective, I don't fully understand. My guess is that the reason I don't fully understand is because I as an English person, I don't I don't really appreciate the difference between who you support from, who's in power, and how their policies almost like automatically give you a side to align with. And I think probably my interpretation of this is that the message seemed in some ways as though it could be directly related to supporting the government that's in power at the moment, as opposed to what I think ended up coming towards the end of the conversation, which is, look, it's in everybody's interest, regardless of which side that you stand upon, to support this. And I know there's a number of people that, because this is a big subject, it seems, everything from the food industry, to vaccination, to the farmers. Like there seems to be a whole lot of things that are sort of grouped into this conversation, which people have different views. But I think my takeaway, which maybe is good to reflect upon, is like the message that Callie was talking about towards the end was, look, this is in everybody's interest, regardless of who's in power, and we should figure out a way to identify the things we agree upon, as opposed to some of the sort of fringe subjects that we don't necessarily agree on. That's my view. Emma, you're also not. Well, I guess you are an American citizen now, but you probably can
Are
more
you an
relate.
American citizen, Emma?
What was that, Mo?
I did not realize that you were an American citizen.
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
Congratulations. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah, look, it was
Matthew's
interesting for
next.
me also, Matt, for the same reason. So, just to sort of level set what we're talking about here. So Kelly Means comes on, lobbyist, special government employee, someone who has the air of Bobby. Everyone seems to be Bobby Kennedy's mate at the moment, which, is going to be handy in some ways. So he came on and they were basically talking about how to make America healthy again. Anthony came on later and talk about Mama making America move again. So sort of a fitness first directive. So I was sort of coming from, and I'm like you, Matt, I can separate the politics and I'm saying, are we generally moving in a healthier direction or a less healthy direction? When we're talking about big pharma, where 95% of our spend, the $5 trillion problem we have right now, when we look at that, are we making good decisions? And then you also hear, when I back in with that, this thing that we're learning has come to the White House as well. And this is driven by the big pharma, big food, all the people that are on the other side, if you think in terms of the health equation. And they're hearing, we've got to stop this big wellness thing. We've got to stop these biohackers and these people who are talking about movement and sunlight and all of these things. We've got to stop them from getting, the president's ear and things like that. So I looked at it and I thought, because I thought they were great addresses. I mean, obviously you've got a lobbyist, they're fantastic orators, they know how to get a rise, but everything that was being said at face value to me made sense. And I also want to give a shout out to all the HFA folks who've just been fighting to get, bills passed and all of that good stuff. So I think we're all generally trying to move in the right direction. However, there's other undercurrents under there. How are you on stage? Why are you on stage? What are you pushing? But what I took from that was, politics is hard. I think it's an almost impossible Olympic sport. So I definitely got that. It moves glacially. The fact that fitness is now considered an innovation, our industry is now on the innovation agenda to see if this could play a positive part in making America healthy again. I'm like, are you frigging kidding me? Like, it's like, so that you're getting an insight. People talked about the gravitas of being in the White House and having conversations and all that responsibility, and how it's not just another boardroom, because we have lobbying, because we have money, we have massive industries that are relying on a length of customer for their whole life, keeping them just well enough to, all of that, all the stories that we know. So I took from it positive that we have these bigger conversations. I've never personally been in the presence of these big conversations before. And then of course Anthony followed up with, how do we get people moving? Is it the chicken or the egg? Do we have to get, sleep first, or do we have to get movement first? Whatever, we all know sort of the pillars of wellness. So I took that it was pretty powerful to be in those conversations. I also got how complex it was, and little things like one of the facts that stuck with me afterwards. I was talking to someone who's in big food, and they're like, we can say make it healthy overnight, stop doing all the shit, stop putting preservatives in, like all the things that we know are wrong with our food system. But to get our food companies to do this would also bring this country to its knees right now, like changing the supply chain, the whole way through. So I was just getting an education in how hard change is. You're up against the dollar, like the whole world is funded, or our country is funded in this way. So I got the complexity of it. I got that there's good work happening and that we kind of need to get in behind. But Mo, I'm really interested in you were talking to the guys, tell us that perspective.
I would love to. I mean, look, just to be like, all three of us in some cases we're not in some cases, we are all immigrants. I migrated here from Dubai. Emma and Matthew's going to be officially maybe you are an honorary American citizen, as I always like to say.
Thank you,
So
Mo.
we all came here as immigrants from other countries, and typically, America is a melting pot. I don't know if that term is appropriate or not, but it is the best of what is in the world. And I think, sometimes though, we don't want to know the truth. Like there are a lot of things we try to hide. This goes into how we treated Native Americans hundreds of years ago, and even with slavery and things like that. But we're dealing in a real-time issue right now with health. Here are the facts, regardless of what political party you're on, facts do not lie. Over 42% of US adults today and 20% of children are classified as obese. Okay, this contributes to $173 billion a year in obesity-related healthcare costs. Around 75% of US healthcare spending goes towards chronic illness, which, by the way, most of which are linked to lifestyle factors like poor diet and inactivity. And prescription drug spending hit a record 600 billion in 2023, with nearly 1 in 4 Americans who are skipping that due to the cost. So while all that's happening with people, pharmaceutical and healthcare companies have record-breaking drug sales. GLP-1 topped $30 billion globally. Over the past 2 decades, US healthcare companies have paid $2.6 trillion to shareholders, which is about 95% of their net income. And the US makes up about 70% of global pharma profits. So this is a profit-making machine, and it's an uphill battle right now. And I just, the point I'm trying to make here is that there's a massive imbalance that the US lags behind other developed nations in key health metrics like life expectancy and infant mortality. That's unacceptable. So the bottom line is Americans today, we are sicker than we've ever been. Our healthcare systems and drug companies are richer. And there's a significant misalignment between high spending and actual health improvements. One interesting topic of conversation that we spoke about at the dinner table, which I was unaware of, but I took some notes around, is around Japan and childhood and how childhood obesity is dealt in Japan. I'm going to paint this picture for you, and I'd love to get both of your perspectives on whether this would happen in the US or not. So in Japan today, they have a school-based health monitoring system called Shokui, which has annual health checkups that are mandatory for all school children. This includes height, weight, BMI, vision, hearing, and other things. If a child is found to be overweight or underweight, parents receive a personalized letter and consultation from the school nurse or local health office. Japan has a national school lunch program that is heavily regulated for nutrition and portion control. Meals are designed by licensed dietitians that emphasize seasonal and whole foods. Children also eat together in the classroom, promoting mindful eating and a shared food culture. Japanese school children incorporate daily physical activity. They emphasize active commuting, so most children walk to school. They offer local health support. But here's the bottom line with Japan. Japan treats childhood obesity as a public health issue, not as a moral failing. Interventions are discreet, they're respectful, and they focus on long-term well-being. So the key to Japan, we always look at Japan and we always look at the adult population in Japan, but what was really interesting about that conversation is Japan puts all the focus on children by focusing on early detection, education over shame, community-wide health literacy, and systems that normalize healthy behaviors. So it's just a complete contrast. If we address obesity with our children happening today, it would be like if a politician came out and said that, it'd be a highly controversial issue. But instead, what we look at is, people in Japan appear to be healthy as adults, but a lot of this stuff starts at the young age. So I think this is a non-bipartisan issue. I think it really plays into our fears as adults. We are all parents, and candidly, we are doing a disservice to our children because we are kind of living. If we want to be okay eating unhealthy food, not moving, then we're kind of okay if our children do the same thing because it makes us feel better about ourselves as parents. So I think that that was kind of the major theme that we were talking about at dinner, with an awesome table. So would love to get Matthew. I'll start with you, but any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think everything that was said, and even in the conversation, I think I think most people agree with the challenge, particularly in the US and how politics works here, is making it making it a policy that everybody can get behind without the fact that because this is supported and driven by one party, it then becomes something that if you're with that party, you're with, and if you're not, it's something to argue against and come up with a number of reasons. I think that's the challenge that that the Americans have as a society here, instead of it being, like you said, a bipartisan issue. How that is achieved, no idea. But I do think Callie mentioned that towards the end of his conversation, and it was just interesting listening to people. They definitely sort of had a view on where this came from if they wasn't necessarily in support of that particular party, and then it also quickly got attached to other things that are happening at the moment that got nothing to do with the health of the society.
It sounds like a simple solution, doesn't it? And it makes absolute sense. And then you realize how hard that's going to be to execute. I think towards the end of Kelly's address, I think he mentioned at some point we have to plan to the future, like to the Japanese example, where what are we doing for the children? Because changing the food mechanism, I think someone mentioned something like 15 years or something. It has to be a program of work towards this. I'd say one other thing I'd add in there, and I'm going to pull in the GLP-1 panel, something's coming up for me here too. We should never underestimate, like politics aside, policy aside, what we all agree to do, actually executing it is super hard because we're now dealing not with people who are a little bit off in terms of what they eat and how they live, and some of it's their fault, a lot of it isn't. It's the way that we live. It's just the sheer fact that we're all addicted to things. And I would like to say good luck pulling off the French fries, all the bad things that we're eating right now. Like, if we try to change something that we're actually addicted to, that is actually another whole level. It's beyond behavioral change. It's the science, the chemistry that's happening in our brain, where we're getting the kicks, all of those sorts of things. And that came to me because there was a comment made on the GLP-1 panel as well, which was, that's obviously an evolving story. And, at least I think a quarter of the Americans or 30% of Americans do see themselves, using that as a solution to sort of bring, their health in line. But there was a comment made around, well, people should, and I think it was from Telehealth, and he mentioned that people should show the good behaviours before they're allowed to get the medication. So let's see 6 months of, good weight training and sensible food choices and things like that. And I just think motivation is a really hard thing when you're not a freak like us. We're in the fitness industry, quite like the idea of moving, and we're relatively fit in the sense that we can enjoy those returns. And I think if you're addicted and that's not your life and it's not your passion, doing a U-turn and doing things ahead of something like that, when you actually understand the pathway of GLP-1, it's changing the way you feel about food. You are feeling full, stomach's, slower to empty, and you are less likely to make those poor choices. So I just think we've been wired in a way that's actually, it's very powerful to have to unwire that or rewire or create healthy habits. If I'm given a bag of chips and I've been brought up on that, I'm going to go for that every day of the week. I'm not going to want the salad. So I'm just saying there's a complexity beyond bills and what we've decided to do and all of those things for the people that are in there now. So I just want to make that point because I see it again and again. We deal in motivation and behavioral change, and there's just a whole rewiring that would need to go. And then you've got to approach, a lot of these decisions. Everyone in that room was relatively wealthy, relatively top of the chain, relatively academic, with a reading age well above seventh grade. And really, if you look at the mass of America, what are we really talking about here? So just some additional thoughts.
Mm. Well, that leads me on to let's jump into the Gary Brecker session because I think that was quite interesting as well. And there was Gary was introduced by Anthony Geisler, and it seems as I'm not sure, but it seems as though there's a relationship between those two guys, and it was quite interesting that Anthony, within his session, mentioned about the fact that he's been able to, he was in the White House, and able to, he was in a position where he's able to push his mama, which is Make America Move Again, and he's been given the opportunity to push this, which was fantastic. But also he was referring to the fact that his concept of getting people to move was almost classed as innovative, and he was directed to the innovation department because fitness is in somehow viewed by government as being innovative. You've then got Gary Brecker that came on, really talking at quite a high level about his view on health and wellness, and I guess some of the failings in terms of the advice that we've been given by probably doctors and industry about some of the common illnesses that we're dealing with, and that his philosophy probably could deal with it in a slightly different way. Now, I know Gary has a lot of supporters and he's doing some great stuff, but on the flip side, there's also a lot of people that are quite critical with some of the ideas and concepts that Gary talk about. So I think when it comes to government, on one level, the information that we, or the challenge that we're dealing with is really breaking this information down to an extremely basic level, which can't be challenged in any way, even by some of the big food and big pharma that are definitely not motivated to let the fitness and wellness people get much of a looking, because it's certainly against their business. But then on the other side, we have some of these experts that are coming in, and I think there's I think we've got to be quite careful with what we're saying and who are the people that we're putting forward to this, because you could quite easily get marginalized as these freaky fitness people that they're making all these claims that can't be substantiated. So I was just curious, one, thoughts on the Gary Brecker session, but also how that relates to the previous conversation in terms of how we should be sort of communicating and positioning ourselves as an industry so that we don't continue to get marginalized as people that are pushing things that are not necessarily correct.
So unfortunately, I actually missed the session. I had an offsite meeting. The session was rescheduled. They were supposed to kick off with it. But yeah, so unfortunately I missed it. However, I do know the influence of what he's done, and also other influencers like Andrew Huberman, Peter Attia, and just so many others. I think the bottom line is that the consumer, and this goes back to the pandemic, I think no matter what political side you're on, it has evolved, right? Whether the pandemic, because we're stuck at our home, so a couple of things happened. One, they got wearables, they got invested in health, they started cooking at home because the restaurants were closed, and all of a sudden they started feeling better. They weren't going out after work and having that drink, 5 days a week. Instead, now they're controlling what they're drinking at home. And as a result, and people were just so attuned with how diseases spread, and wearing the masks and washing hands and kind of doing all the things. And then all the talk around the vaccines, which is when people got excited about, not excited, I mean, informed rather, around what a vaccine is and what the impact of that is, and came to their own opinions around it. And so then we saw the rise of these wellness influencers, largely led by the pandemic. So what you have today is consumers that are coming into our gyms, even going to their doctors. In a lot of ways, they are a lot more informed about their own health. I mean, imagine 10 years ago, how many people would be tracking their HRV, or even know what their HRV is, even know what the resting heart rate is, even understand sleep stages or sleep cycles, or what greens are, and kind of all the things around that. Very, very few. And then you've got our medical institutions who are lagging behind what these influencers are putting out. So there is some distrust from the large part of the medical community. And there's also distrust from large part of these influencer wellness community towards healthcare. I think there's good and not so good in each, right? And I think it's and the challenge for consumers and us as being fitness professionals is how do we filter that? Like, we're not saying don't go to your doctor, nor are we saying listen to every influencer out there. So I think we sit at the unique intersection between fitness and healthcare, or wellness and healthcare, where, and we are also a trusted source. A lot of cases, people will trust their personal trainer, and we have data on this, over their actual doctor when it comes to wellness advice. So, how do we better equip them? How do we, um, filter through the noise and get to the actual substance that we could then help our members and people that we interact with ultimately lead and improve their health outcomes? So that's my takeaway from it, is that you can't take everything from an influencer, just like you probably can't take everything from your doctor as well.
My take on this is, I'm sitting here now in Anaheim at the VidCon convention. I've met probably half a dozen people in the last couple of days who have more following than probably most of our gyms put together. So when we're talking about the Gary Breckers of the world, the Hubermans, etc., we really need to think about that power of influence. Now, in his opening remarks, Eddie did talk about, evidence led. We don't want things to be deregulated. We want the good science to come through. And I've got a couple of thoughts here. One is, innovation can come from within. We had many, many stories about how innovating, using your data, using your software systems, using your platforms, and innovating through that and how you're serving your members. There was a lot of talk around that innovation, including AI. And then there was also talk about innovation also comes from the edge. It does come from the extremists, penicillin. Like, you think about the things that happened, whether they were an accident or whether you've actually got the extreme biohackers at the edge finding stuff. My father was a pediatrician, and they used to smoke until they worked out that smoking wasn't good for you. So I think there's also a story through here around we must evolve with the times. We have to do the best that we can with studies that are legit, not paid for by the vendor, that then, who stands to win from the science? I think we always have to think from that perspective. If that's the outcome, who stands to win and who paid for the study? Like, we always have to look around that sort of stuff. So academia, and Mo and you and I were at a great thing in San Francisco recently, and we had the academics sitting next to the clubs and gyms and everyone who pushes stuff out, and also all the wearables and the technology and the Stravas and the Whoops and the Auras and all the people. How do we stitch together a story that's cognizant of each of those, knowing that they're all businesses and they all need to make some money? And how do we sort of streamline that? So, and I look at all of that and I think that's actually a very thoughtful marketing exercise. Two things. We must learn to move with the times. So if I'm looking at women's health, for example, and there was a great panel on this at the session, in the sessions as well. How do I go, this year, this is what we know about women's health, knowing that there wasn't much real research done before the 1990s. This is what we know now, and expect there to be changes as we learn more. So I think we as humans, we need to be much more critical thinking, not just swallowing all the fads, but actually going, this is what we know right now, for sure. It's been studied to this degree. This might work, and maybe we try it for ourselves and do a little experiment. And then, but know that this time next year, once we've run these new 20 studies, that we can actually adopt that. Because I also see people getting stuck in their ways around what they understand things to be. So I think there's that fluid thing. Then there's the argument around who do we actually follow. And the point that I would say right now, and we're seeing this, education, universities, colleges, are having a moment right now. Like, how relevant are they when a lot of people are following TikTok or YouTube or Googling or AIing or doing something to actually find out about something, realizing that it might not be truthful, but it's a good starting point. So when I look at this, I'm like, we just have to be critical thinking. But given that the average reading age is much lower than we would perhaps like, but that's a fact, we just have to, as an industry, band together and decide what we're going to allow to get out there, but be a united voice on it. So, and I think that's where we're sort of barging into each other is it the hackers or is it the pure science? Now, if you're in the pure science, you're going to deliver a 60-page, dissertation, okay, and it's going to be too much. At the end of the day, the TikTok influencer is going to deliver a 1-page meme or a 10-second reel capturing you in the first 3 seconds. So somewhere in there, we have to manage the message more. And, there's even controversy around WHO. Like, it doesn't matter what the establishment is, there's always going to be pros and cons. But I think our job is to examine everything, give it all a good shake, and then make sure that there is enough research going around it by people who matter, by people who don't stand to win out of it, neutral, and then actually move from there. Yeah, it's an interesting concept.
Well, I think we're well over time this week, and normally we will have a quick wrap up where we share a couple of takeaways from this episode, or probably even from the event. So Mo, we've covered a lot of ground really today, but what are some of your takeaways from today?
If I were to look at our conversation today and also the event, there's probably a few things I'm walking away with. One, and I know this was mentioned in the opening remarks as well, but we're shifting away from siloed products into more connected ecosystems, which I think is a really important transformation. I'd also say that consumer-led innovation, which is what we were just talking about now, is real and it's accelerating. So we can't ignore it. We kind of have to understand what to do with it. And then finally, I'd probably add is the AI's next frontier is really context and personalization. I think that's really where AI's application in our category is really going to be important, not just in automation, which is how a lot of other industries are looking at AI, right? How can they automate processes and so on? But for us, it's context and personalization, and ultimately the wellness category, as we define it, right? Sleep, recovery, and longevity is now central to performance. It's not just in the periphery. It's something that is defining our industry and not just something that's like, it's kind of like out there. So we've got to really embrace it and be all in. Emma.
For me, absolutely the bar has been lifted. Absolutely. The conversations are higher. The people are more important. By that, I mean people who can really change, the people who are running these organizations. I loved one of the quotes that came out over the couple of days: proceed with healthy paranoia. Competition is coming, accept that it's coming, and it's going to solve all the things we said or couldn't do ourselves. It's going to solve attrition. It's going to solve personalization. It's going to solve we don't know what our members are doing. It's going to solve behavioral change. So expect that to be coming. Connect, collaborate, communicate, work with our industry. Stop seeing it as competition. We're not even in the big dollars. Put both arms around AI, put both arms around GLP-1s, whatever you think about it, it's here. They're freight trains. They're funded by far bigger industries than we have right now. Innovation is coming from data, so get in there, learn about that. Is your data being put to work? Learn from that. I would love to see a little bit more female representation. Yes, there were women's panels, and yes, I understand that all of that. I'd love to see more female investors, all of these things, just to level out the conversation. The fact that Eddie couldn't put together a tariffs conversation means that we're still not truly ready to have honest conversations. And just a challenge to our industry, and I don't know how we get around this. We hear all these people presenting on stage, and that it's not the complete truth because it can't be in that forum. You've got investors, the press, staff members, PR. You've got all of that happening in the room. It's very hard to have the real conversation. We'll often go to dinner and have the real conversation. I don't know how we can do that severe transparency without losing your funding or your staff or your members. So, just putting that out there. And then I would say that absolutely wellness has mainstreamed.
Matthew, any final thoughts?
Yeah, a couple of quick things. One, Emma touched on this, and I was probably in one of the conversations where this came up. But just honesty, we've all been to many of these events, and you always get the highlight reel. I think what a lot of people are really interested in is the real story. Okay, I'm dealing with this. This is what I did to overcome it, or these are the things that I'm working on, because those are really the things that people need most at the moment, and I sense there's definitely a thirst for that. But the challenge is, you obviously, if you've got investors or you're a listed company, the last thing you want to be doing is talking about the challenges that you're dealing with. But somehow being able to have those conversations, I think, are going to be pretty valuable. And I think, as I said, there's definitely a thirst for that. Maybe that's something we can cover on our podcast at some point. The second thing is the demographic. Mo, you mentioned this, and I think Emma, you touched on it as well. We talk a lot about what people do and their awareness of fitness and their general fitness literacy. But I'm just wondering whether we're dealing with minority of haves versus the majority of have-nots. And these are not people that go to these events. These are probably people that we may not spend a lot of time talking to, but there's a huge percentage of the population in many countries around the world that probably don't dial into this, that are not aware of it. And that's probably the area that needs the most help. And I'm just wondering, and it also links into Anthony's conversation, Anthony's comment about how the White House sees fitness as almost like innovative, because probably it is for many people. Just basic things like getting people to move, almost that, it's very, very elementary compared to understanding your sleep score and your heart rate variability. But how many people really that represent the majority of the population are actually anywhere near that in their heads? There's probably a whole list of things that they're dealing with, and understanding your sleep score for the day probably isn't top of their things to worry about at the moment. And then the final thing is that Callie mentioned is that fitness must step into the role of the frontline healthcare. But I think that's a great statement. Totally believe in it and support it. However, I think when we're talking about fitness in our industry, and it was mentioned at the very beginning, is it's very broad and wide. For a sort of HIIT studio that's doing boot camps or maybe yoga, maybe they're not that, maybe that's not that relevant for them. But there's also a big sector of very influential businesses within this space that probably could do that and are starting to do that, for example. And I think it's understanding how we segment the industry, and the people that are probably going to move into that space and do a great job, and the ones that it's probably not necessarily that relevant.
Well, I want to give a big thanks to the team behind Athletech. I know we mentioned them on this podcast, but Eddie, Leah, and everyone else that kind of put it together on launching what was really like a unique event. It was their first time doing it. I'm sure that wasn't easy, and a lot of effort went into it. Just a really good event, good put together event, great attendees. And Emma, always great to have you on the mic with us. Thank you so much for coming on in the middle of another conference that you're at.
Yeah, thank you very much, Emma.
Great to be here. Great to be here. Thanks.
Well, that's it for this week. And again, I appreciate Eddie for looking after us whilst we were at the event. I'm hoping that he decides to do it next year. It certainly stimulated a lot of conversation within our small group. I hope you enjoyed the conversation today. If you did, then please help us get this out to more people by sharing it, giving us a like, leaving a comment. And thank you very much for listening to this week's episode of Lifts.